So President Trump is threatening to cut the federal funding for schools that do not reopen in the fall. Let's throw that tweet up. In Germany, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and many other countries, schools are open with no problems. The Dems think it would be bad for them politically if U.S. schools open before the November election, but is important for the children and families, may cut off funding if not open. He sent another tweet out that was more definitive, saying that they would cut the funding if schools do not reopen. Now, already there was, of course, a big debate about what schools should do in the fall. And look, as the mother of 3 school-aged children, I can tell you that I think everybody wants schools to be able to reopen safely. But one of the tenets of conservatism has long been this sort of local approach to education, allowing local school districts to make up their own minds about what makes sense and what does not. So let me just say, I think the idea of cutting funding for schools because they don't reopen, because they deem it unsafe for them to reopen fully in the fall, is to me completely bonkers on a moral level, on a policy level, and certainly on a political level. Betsy Devos was on a couple of the Sunday shows over the weekend. Chris Wallace actually pressed her pretty aggressively about her thinking here. Let's take a listen.
Under what authority are you and the president going to unilaterally cut off funding, the funding that's been approved from Congress, and most of the money goes to disadvantaged students or students with disabilities? And secondly, isn't cutting off funding exactly the wrong answer? Don't you want to spend more money to make schools safer, whether it's with plastic shields or health checks, various other systems? Doesn't it make more sense to increase funding for schools where it's unsafe rather than cut off funding?
Look, American investment in education is a promise to students and their families. If schools aren't going to reopen and not fulfill that promise, they shouldn't get the funds.
And she goes on to talk about, she makes this sort of allusion to, you should get your taxpayers' dollars back and be able to use them. Okay, just so we're totally clear, Betsy Devos is an ideological warrior against public education in favor of voucherizing the system. She sees an opportunity here in this crisis to defund schools and advance her agenda, and President Trump is going right along with it.
Well, and the other thing is what Chris calls her out. He's like, you don't have the power to do that. That was the best part of this Trump tweet. Oh, it's like, you don't have the power to do any of that. Congress appropriates
the
money.
funds.
That's how this stuff works. So, sorry, this is not the way to go about it. And broadly, yeah, it's the most foolish move. You want schools to reopen? Then act like you have a handle on the crisis. I think schools should reopen, even right now, amidst all this craziness, from all the data, all the stuff that I've seen and the policy recommendations of people, which is that kids have lower levels of transmission, even amongst themselves, and that because they don't fall victim to the virus, that as a societal benefit, it would be better. I mean, I was just talking to you about this. My mom is a public school advocate, is somebody, professor of education. The amount of developmental loss that you're going to have from not having schools, especially for our poorest, most vulnerable children, this is a nightmare scenario. To have them out of the system for so long is one of the best ways, in order for childcare as well. I am thinking of all these working class moms who have nothing.
It throws your life into chaos.
Their kids. I was at a coffee shop the other day, and a woman had her mom, had her kid, 2-year-old kid, in the corner playing with her iPad. She had to go check on her. It was terrible. I mean, she shouldn't have to do that. Have to work, try to take care of customers and be able to do that all in the middle of the day.
Wow.
It's things like that where you're like, oh man, like I said, I think schools should reopen. As far as I can tell, many of the teachers and others want to reopen as well. But it's like going after the funding, trying to compel that in this particular way. And maybe there's an argument to that. Let's say if you are doing a pretty good job of containing coronavirus crisis, if you are in a situation where the public has command, feels like you have command of that, and there are still some intransigent school districts who are run by very paranoid parents. Maybe there's an argument for that. I think the public would support it, but just a broad swath oh no, all you're going to cut, you have to reopen like this. it's just not the right way to go. It's so ham-fisted.
It
it's
is
just wrong.
so heavy-handed, so wrong. Chris makes the point rightfully there that we actually should be giving them more funding so that they can prepare, so that they can have added space or additional help or safeguards or PPE or whatever it is. Like, schools actually need more assistance to be able to reopen safely. And of course, you have no room to talk when your administration has completely failed to get this thing under control so that people could feel safe about reopening. The other thing here with Devos is, she really had no answers. Dana Bash also interviewed her in a lengthy interview on Sunday. She had no answers about how to advise schools about whether to reopen or how to do it, what guidelines they should meet. She really had nothing to say. Let's take a little bit of a listen to that.
There's really good examples that have been utilized in the private sector and elsewhere, also with frontline workers and hospitals. And all of that data and all of that information and all of those examples can be referenced by school leaders.
But I'm not hearing a plan from the Department of Education. Do you have a plan for what students and what schools should do?
So schools should do what's right on the ground at that time for their students and for their situation.
But that's great.
What I'm talking about.
Yeah, do what's right for your students in that situation based on the conditions on the ground. That's very different from, and by the way, if you don't do what we want you to do, we're going to cut your funding.
Or
opposite.
If you don't agree with the CDC guidelines, which they're like, well, we don't necessarily agree with the CDC guidelines. Okay, make some. You're the federal government.
Right.
Make some.
What are your guidelines?
Consult with CDC. Consult with this. Make it so that there's a phased reopening. Make it so that you're all desks have to be X, all teachers face shields and gloves, all so-and-so. Fine.
And if you reach this level of viral spread, then you should go to Plan B, and this is what you should do. No, none of that. It's just all heavy-handed. I covered really closely and was on the ground for a number of the teacher movements in West Virginia and Kentucky in particular, and here in Virginia, other red states across the country in particular. And if you mess with schools and you mess with teachers, you are playing with fire. You should ask, and this again is not about the morality of it or the policy, this is about the politics of it. Ask Matt Bevin in Kentucky, now former governor of Kentucky, what happens when you go and you mess with the public education system. Because these are pillars of community, especially in rural America and small town America. These institutions are so vital and so important. The teachers in those institutions are some of the most, widely respected. Everyone has a teacher in their family. My mom's a teacher, your mom's involved in education, my sister's a teacher. Go to a small town America and ask them how they feel about their public education system and how they're willing to fight for that public education system, and you are going to find some very powerful sentiments, such that it kicked out, a Republican governor in a state as red as Kentucky, and West Virginia, a legislature that was overwhelmingly held by Republicans with a Republican governor, bent to the will of the teachers movement. So politically here, this is a complete disaster, and they are absolutely playing with fire.
Yeah, they really are. I think it's a very foolish move. And as usual, get a handle on coronavirus crisis and everything else.
And this won't be a problem. All right, more Rising for you after this.